My name is Denise Warren. I'm 62 years old, and I never imagined I'd be standing at my only son Michael's funeral hearing those cruel words. "I'm not taking care of that old witch," my daughter-in-law Jessica whispered loudly to her friend, unaware I could hear every word. After 3 years of marriage, her true colors were finally showing. What Jessica didn't know was that before cancer took my son, he had secretly changed his will. I'd love to know where you're watching from today. If stories of family betrayal, grief, and ultimate justice speak to you, please hit that like button and subscribe. This journey through the darkest day of my life will show you how my son protected me even after he was gone. Life has a way of teaching you that nothing is permanent. I learned that lesson first when I lost my husband Robert to a heart attack 7 years ago, and then again when cancer took my only son Michael last year. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to the beginning. Robert and I built a modest but happy life in our small Connecticut town. We weren't wealthy by any means, but we had enough. Robert worked as an engineer at the local manufacturing plant, and I taught second grade at the elementary school 3 blocks from our home. We saved carefully, took 1 vacation each summer, and focused on creating a loving home for our son. Michael was our miracle baby. After 3 miscarriages and countless fertility treatments, we had almost given up hope of ever having a child. Then at 35, I became pregnant with Michael. The pregnancy was difficult, and complications during delivery meant I couldn't have any more children, but that was okay. We had our perfect boy. From the moment he was born, Michael was special, not just to us as devoted parents, but truly exceptional in his own right. He was reading by age 4, skipped second grade entirely, and had a natural affinity for numbers that amazed his teachers. But more important than his intelligence was his heart. Michael was genuinely kind. He was the child who befriended the new kid, who gave away his lunch when another child forgot theirs, who brought home injured birds and nursed them back to health. "That boy's going to change the world," Robert would say proudly, watching Michael hunched over math problems far beyond his grade level. As Michael grew, our bond deepened. Some teenagers pull away from their parents, but Michael seemed to understand the value of family. Yes, he had his friends and activities, but Sunday dinners were sacred in our home. He'd share stories from school, discuss books he was reading, or debate world events with his father. I cherished those conversations around our old oak table, the 3 of us laughing and talking long after the food was gone. When Michael was accepted to Princeton with a partial scholarship, I cried with pride. Robert and I had saved for college since the day Michael was born, but the prestigious university was still a financial stretch. Michael worked summers and part-time during school to help with expenses, never complaining. "It's an investment in my future," he'd say, "and someday I'll make sure you guys never have to worry about money again." After graduating summa cum laude, Michael accepted a position at a prestigious investment firm in New York City. His rise through the company was meteoric. By 30, he was managing major accounts and making the kind of money Robert and I could barely comprehend. But success never changed his fundamental character. He'd still come home for Sunday dinners, when he could still call me twice a week, just to chat, still remembered every birthday and anniversary with thoughtful gifts. When Michael was 32, he met Sarah Donovan, a pediatric nurse with a quick laugh and gentle manner that reminded me a bit of myself at her age. The first time he brought her home, I knew she was special from the way his eyes followed her around the room. "What do you think, Mom?" he asked later while Sarah was helping Robert grill on the back patio. "I think she's lovely," I said honestly. "But more importantly, she makes you light up." They married a year later in a simple ceremony in our backyard. Sarah fit perfectly into our family, calling me for recipes and advice, joining our Sunday traditions with genuine enthusiasm. She and Michael bought a modest apartment in Brooklyn, despite Michael's increasing success. Sarah kept working at the children's hospital she loved, and they talked about starting a family soon. Then came the diagnosis that changed everything: aggressive breast cancer at 34. Sarah fought bravely for 18 months with Michael by her side every step of the way. He took leaves of absence, worked remotely, and spent nights sleeping in uncomfortable hospital chairs. I came to stay with them during the worst periods, cooking meals, cleaning their apartment, doing whatever I could to lighten their burden. When Sarah died, a part of Michael seemed to die with her. He threw himself into work, taking on more responsibility, working longer hours. I worried about him but respected his way of grieving. Every weekend I took the train to New York to check on him, stocking his refrigerator, making sure he was eating and sleeping. Gradually over the next year, I saw glimpses of my son returning. The light wasn't fully back in his eyes, but he started mentioning friends again, occasionally going out living rather than just existing. I began to hope that he might find happiness again, though I knew Sarah would always hold a special place in his heart. 2 years after Sarah's death, Michael called with unusual excitement in his voice. "Mom, I met someone at the hospital fundraiser for the pediatric oncology wing we dedicated to Sarah. Her name is Jessica Davis. She works in public relations for the hospital foundation." That detail should have been my first clue. Looking back, it was calculated meeting my son at an event honoring his late wife. But at the time, I was simply happy to hear enthusiasm in Michael's voice again. A month later, I met Jessica when Michael brought her to Connecticut for the weekend. Where Sarah had been warm and unassuming, Jessica was stunning and polished. Tall, with perfectly highlighted blonde hair, designer clothes, and the kind of confidence that commanded attention the moment she entered a room. She was 15 years younger than Michael, but carried herself with the sophistication of someone much older. "Your home is so charming," she said, glancing around our modest living room with what I now recognize was barely disguised disdain. So authentic. Throughout the weekend, Jessica was perfectly pleasant, complimenting my cooking, asking appropriate questions about Michael's childhood, showing interest in family photos. But something felt off. The warmth never reached her eyes, and I noticed how she subtly steered Michael away whenever he and I fell into our comfortable patterns of conversation. "She's different from Sarah," I said carefully to Robert after they left. "She makes him happy," Robert replied, always the optimist. "That's what matters." I agreed, pushing aside my reservations. After all, no one would ever compare to Sarah in my mind. Perhaps I was being unfair to Jessica simply because she wasn't the daughter-in-law I'd grown to love and lost. If only I had trusted my instincts. But how could I know then what a crucial mistake that would be? Jessica became a permanent fixture in Michael's life with breathtaking speed. Within 6 months of their first meeting, she had moved into his Brooklyn apartment and was wearing an engagement ring that must have cost more than Robert and I had paid for our entire house. "Isn't it a bit soon?" I ventured during one of my increasingly rare phone conversations with Michael. "When you know, Mom," he replied, a defensive edge creeping into his voice. "I'm 40 years old. I'm not rushing into anything." But he was. The Michael I knew was methodical, thoughtful, someone who researched major purchases for weeks. The Michael who was now planning a wedding had transformed into someone I barely recognized. "She makes me feel alive again," he explained when I expressed concern about the pace. "After Sarah, I didn't think that was possible." How could I argue with that? My son had suffered an unimaginable loss. If Jessica brought him happiness, who was I to question it? The wedding was set for just 3 months later at the Plaza Hotel, a venue so expensive it made my stomach clench thinking about the cost. When I tentatively suggested the beautiful botanical gardens where he and Sarah had married, Michael's expression hardened. "Jessica deserves her own special day, Mom. She doesn't want to live in Sarah's shadow." The wedding itself was a spectacle unlike anything our family had ever been associated with. 200 guests, many of whom Michael had never mentioned before. A designer gown for Jessica that cost more than a car. Exotic flowers flown in from South America. A 10-piece band and 5-course dinner with wine pairings. Jessica's parents, wealthy from her father's real estate developments in Florida, contributed, but Michael bore the majority of the expense. Robert, always so steady, whispered to me during the reception, "I don't recognize our son in all this extravagance." It was the first time he had acknowledged what I'd been feeling for months. By then it was too late. Michael and Jessica were married, and our son was becoming increasingly distant. The changes accelerated after the honeymoon. Michael and Jessica sold the Brooklyn apartment and purchased a luxury penthouse on the Upper East Side. Sunday visits became monthly, then quarterly. Phone calls grew shorter, with Michael often saying he was too busy to talk. When they did visit Connecticut, Jessica made little effort to hide her boredom and discomfort in our provincial town. "You really should consider moving somewhere more vibrant," she suggested during one visit, glancing around our living room with thinly veiled distaste. "This place must be so isolating, especially now that you're alone, Denise." Robert had passed away just 6 months before this particular visit, his heart finally giving out after a lifetime of devotion to his family. My grief was still raw, my adjustment to widowhood barely begun. Michael shot Jessica a warning look, but didn't directly counter her insensitive comment. That same visit, I overheard Jessica on the phone in our guest bedroom door, slightly ajar. "God, I can't wait to leave this shabby little house," she was saying to someone. "Michael insists we stay 2 nights. I told him his burden of a mother is a grown woman who needs to build her own life instead of clinging to him." I stepped away silently, heart pounding. When I looked at my son across the dinner table that night, I wanted to ask if that's how he saw me too, a burden. But the words stuck in my throat. I feared the answer. Meanwhile, Jessica's spending escalated to levels that concerned me even from a distance. Through casual conversations, I learned about the vacation home in the Hamptons, the sports car she needed for shopping trips, the frequent spa weekends with friends in Arizona. Michael never complained, but I noticed new lines of stress around his eyes, the way he checked his phone constantly for work emails even during our rare visits. "Are you working too hard?" I asked during one of our brief phone calls. "The market's competitive right now," he deflected. "Just need to stay on top of things." What I didn't know then was that Michael had started liquidating his personal investments to maintain the lifestyle Jessica demanded. His salary, substantial as it was, couldn't keep pace with her spending. When I expressed concern about his health, his weight loss, the dark circles under his eyes, he brushed it off as temporary work stress. "Everything's fine, Mom," became his standard response to my questions. I tried to maintain my connection with Michael, despite Jessica's clear attempts to minimize my role in their lives. I sent thoughtful cards, called regularly, even when he didn't return messages, promptly mailed his favorite homemade cookies to his office, where I knew he would receive them. For his 40th birthday, I took a risk and traveled to New York unannounced, planning to take him to lunch. When I arrived at his office building, his assistant's face registered surprise. "Mrs. Warren, Michael didn't mention you were coming." "It's a surprise," I explained, clutching the small gift I'd brought, a leather-bound journal similar to the ones he'd kept since childhood. The assistant's expression shifted to discomfort. "He's actually out today, with Mrs. Warren. Birthday shopping, I believe." I left the gift with a note and took the train back to Connecticut, fighting tears the entire way. Michael called that evening, his apologies seeming genuine but rushed. "Jessica had planned a whole day. You should have called first, Mom." The distance between us continued to grow, a chasm I didn't know how to bridge. I was losing my son inch by inch and felt powerless to stop it. The call came on a Tuesday morning in early March. I was grading papers at my kitchen table, a job I continued part-time after retirement because I loved keeping my mind active. "Mom." Just that one word, but I knew immediately something was terribly wrong. Michael's voice sounded hollow, shaken in a way I'd only heard once before when he'd called to tell me Sarah had died. "What is it, sweetheart?" I asked, my hand tightening on the phone. "I'm sick." A pause that stretched into infinity. "Cancer, pancreatic, stage 4. The room tilted around me. Pancreatic cancer, the same disease that had taken my father decades earlier. I knew enough to understand what stage 4 meant. The cancer had already spread. The prognosis was poor. "I'm coming to New York," I said immediately. "Today." "Jessica thinks we should handle this privately," he replied, his voice small. For the first time since Jessica had entered our lives, I put my foot down completely. "Michael, I'm your mother. You have cancer. I'm coming. Jessica will need to understand that." There was a moment of silence, then something like relief in his voice. "Actually, I'd really like that, Mom." I packed a bag arranged for a neighbor to water my plants and was on the next train to the city. When I arrived at their penthouse, Jessica answered the door, looking immaculate as always, but clearly unhappy to see me. "Michael's resting," she said, not inviting me in immediately. "The medication makes him drowsy." "I'll sit with him while he sleeps," I replied firmly, stepping past her into the marble-floored entryway. The next few weeks established a pattern that would continue throughout Michael's illness. I stayed in their guest room, waking early to prepare the nutritious foods his doctors recommended, accompanying him to appointments, researching treatment options, and sitting beside him through the brutal side effects of chemotherapy. Jessica, meanwhile, maintained her social calendar with minimal adjustments. "Someone has to keep up appearances," she explained when I questioned her absence from a critical doctor's appointment. "It would be bad for Michael's position at the firm if everyone knew how sick he really is." But I saw the truth during the quiet moments when Michael slept and Jessica was out lunching with friends or shopping. The medical bills piling up on his desk, marked with notations in his precise handwriting. The life insurance policy displayed prominently in his home office. The way he'd begun organizing his papers meticulously, something he'd always done when making major decisions. 3 months into treatment, when it had become clear the chemotherapy was buying time rather than offering hope for remission. Michael asked me to accompany him to a meeting at his lawyer's office. "Don't mention this to Jessica," he said, looking older than his years. "She's under enough stress." I didn't believe that for a moment. Jessica spent more time at the spa than at the hospital, but I nodded, respecting my son's wishes. The meeting was brief and formal. Thomas Ellison, Michael's attorney of many years, greeted us warmly, but with the solemn demeanor of someone conducting serious business. I waited in the lobby during part of their meeting, then was called in to sign some papers as a witness. I didn't ask questions, sensing Michael wasn't ready to explain. On the cab ride home, Michael finally spoke. "I've changed my will, Mom." "Michael, you don't need to." He held up his hand. "I need to know you'll be taken care of. And I've realized some truths about Jessica." His voice was steady but sad. "Please don't tell her about today. It's important that she doesn't know until after." I took his hand, thin now from months of treatment. "I promise." As Michael's condition deteriorated, the dynamics in the penthouse grew increasingly strained. Jessica became visibly impatient with the medical equipment, the visiting nurses, the disruption to her carefully curated life. She complained about the hospital bed in their bedroom, eventually insisting it be moved to the home office so she could get some sleep. I took over primary caregiving duties, learning to administer medications, change dressings, monitor vitals. The nurses who visited commented on my natural ability. "You're a godsend to your son," one said kindly. "Not everyone has someone so devoted." Late one evening, while Michael was sleeping and I was preparing his medications for the next day, I overheard Jessica on the phone in the living room. She didn't realize I had stepped into the hallway. "It's horrible, Tiffany, just horrible," she was saying, her voice dramatically lowered. "The doctors say maybe 2 months now, but after that..." Her voice brightened noticeably. "After that, I get my life back. The insurance payout is massive. I'm thinking of a place in Malibu, completely fresh start." I froze, unable to believe what I was hearing. Jessica continued, unaware of my presence. "His mother is still here, like constantly. I've tried everything to get her to go home, but she won't leave. She's practically moved in. Don't worry, though. Once Michael's gone, that's it. I'm not taking care of some old woman. She's got her teacher's pension or whatever." I retreated silently to the kitchen, hands shaking so badly I nearly dropped the medication tray. That night, I cried silently in the guest room, mourning not only my son's impending death, but the cruelty of the woman he had married. The next morning, I found Michael more lucid than he had been in days, the pain temporarily at bay due to an adjustment in his medication. "Mom," he said, patting the edge of his bed, "I need to tell you something important." I sat beside him, taking his frail hand in mine. "I made a mistake with Jessica," he said simply. "I was lonely after Sarah vulnerable. Jessica was beautiful and exciting, and she made me feel alive again. But it wasn't real." "Oh, Michael." "No, it's okay. I've made my peace with it. But I want you to know that I see clearly now, and I've taken steps to protect what matters." He didn't elaborate and soon drifted back to sleep. It was one of our last real conversations. A week later, he entered a semi-conscious state as the cancer progressed to his liver. The hospice nurse warned me the end was near. "Days, not weeks," she said gently. "Stay close." Jessica chose that day to go shopping for a dress for an upcoming charity gala she insisted she had to attend to keep up appearances for Michael's sake. I sat alone by my son's bedside, holding his hand, telling him stories from his childhood, assuring him it was okay to let go. In his final moments, Michael opened his eyes, seeming to look straight through me to somewhere beyond. "Mom," he whispered so faintly I had to lean close. "Thank you for everything." Those were his last words. He slipped away peacefully while I held his hand. The son I had carried beneath my heart for 9 months, raised for 40 years, and loved every moment of his existence was gone. When Jessica returned 3 hours later, shopping bags in hand, she screamed dramatically upon hearing the news, collapsing into a chair. But I noticed she took time to put her purchases in the bedroom before coming to see Michael's body, and her first call wasn't to the hospice service, but to a friend about funeral arrangements. "It has to be perfect," I heard her say. "Everyone will be there." As I sat beside my son's body, my grief raw and overwhelming, I realized with absolute clarity that I was alone in this luxurious penthouse. Jessica moved around making calls occasionally, dabbing at dry eyes, planning what sounded more like a social event than a funeral for my only child. The next morning, I overheard her on the phone with Michael's assistant, asking detailed questions about accessing his accounts and investment portfolio information. Her grief had apparently taken a back seat to financial concerns within 12 hours of his passing. I retreated into numbness, going through the motions of the next few days. Jessica excluded me from most funeral decisions, informing me of arrangements rather than consulting me. I was too deep in grief to fight focusing what energy I had on writing a eulogy worthy of my extraordinary son. I didn't yet know about Michael's changed will. I didn't yet understand that my son had protected me even in death. I was simply a mother drowning in the most profound loss imaginable, trying to survive each moment until I could return to the quiet solitude of my Connecticut home. The funeral service for Michael was held at St. Patrick's Cathedral, a venue Jessica insisted upon, despite Michael's lifelong preference for simpler settings. The flowers alone must have cost thousands, elaborate white arrangements crowding the altar. A string quartet played softly as hundreds of guests filed in, mostly colleagues and social connections I didn't recognize. I sat in the front row alone despite the crowded church. Jessica had arranged for her parents and sister to sit beside her on the other end of the pew, with several empty seats between us, creating a visible divide. She wore a black Chanel suit with tasteful diamond accessories, looking more like she was attending a fashion event than mourning her husband. People approached to offer condolences, but Jessica intercepted many of them before they could reach me, steering conversations toward herself. "It's been so difficult," I overheard her telling a group of well-dressed women. "I've been so strong for everyone." The service itself was elegant but impersonal. The priest spoke in generalities about Michael, clearly having never met him. When it was my turn to deliver the eulogy, Jessica's expression tightened visibly. I spoke from my heart about the Michael I knew, the compassionate boy who had grown into an extraordinary man, his genuine kindness, his quiet strength, his capacity for love. There were nodding heads and tearful eyes throughout the congregation, connections made through genuine memories rather than polished performance. When I returned to my seat, Jessica leaned across the empty space between us, ostensibly adjusting her program. That's when I heard it spoken to her friend in the row behind us, but clearly intended for me to hear, "I'm not taking care of that old witch. She can go to a nursing home for all I care. This is my life now." The words hit me like physical blows. Even at her husband's funeral, with his body lying in a casket just feet away, Jessica couldn't contain her cruelty. I sat rigidly through the remainder of the service, tears streaming down my face, not just for Michael now, but for the added pain of such calculated unkindness. After the service, Thomas Ellison, Michael's attorney, approached me. "Mrs. Warren, there will be a reading of the will tomorrow morning at 10 at my office. Your presence is requested." Jessica, overhearing this, smiled tightly. "I'll have my attorney there as well." "That's your prerogative," Thomas replied neutrally. "The instructions are quite straightforward." The next morning, I arrived at the law office feeling numb and disoriented. The reality of Michael's death was still settling into my bones, making each movement, each breath feel like moving through deep water. Jessica was already there, looking refreshed and composed, seated beside a sharp-featured man in an expensive suit, her lawyer presumably. "Let's begin," Thomas said after brief introductions. He opened a folder and put on reading glasses. This is the last will and testament of Michael James Warren, revised and signed 4 months ago, properly witnessed and notarized. Jessica's expression was confident, almost smug. I braced myself for the formalization of my exclusion from the life Michael had built. Thomas began reading the legal preamble, then got to the substantive portions. To my wife, Jessica Davis Warren, I leave our residence at 180 East 88th Street, apartment 21A, and a monthly stipend of $10,000 for a period of 5 years. Jessica's smile faltered. Wait, what about the rest? The portfolio, the Hamptons house, the life insurance. Thomas continued without acknowledging her interruption. All remaining assets, including, but not limited to my investment portfolio retirement accounts, the property at 437 Dune Road, Bridgehampton, New York, my personal possessions, and the entirety of my life insurance policy, I leave to my mother, Denise Eleanor Warren. The room went completely silent. Jessica's face transformed shock, giving way to fury. "This is ridiculous," she sputtered. "He was terminally ill. She manipulated him." She turned to me, eyes blazing. "You took advantage of his condition. You poisoned him against me." "Ms. Davis," Thomas said deliberately, using her maiden name. "I can assure you Michael was of sound mind when he made these changes. In fact, he provided extensive documentation regarding his reasons." "What documentation?" Jessica demanded. Thomas removed several more papers from his folder. Bank records showing unusual expenditure patterns, private investigator reports with photographic evidence of your extramarital activities, recordings of phone conversations where you discussed, and I quote, "waiting for him to die so you can finally enjoy his money." The blood drained from Jessica's face. "He spied on me. That's illegal." "New York is a one-party consent state for recordings," her own lawyer murmured, looking increasingly uncomfortable. "This is not over," Jessica hissed, gathering her things. "I'll contest it. I was his wife." "You're welcome to try," Thomas replied calmly, "but I should inform you that contesting triggers a clause that would eliminate the monthly stipend entirely." Jessica stormed out, her lawyer trailing behind after an apologetic glance at Thomas. I sat motionless, trying to process what had just happened. "Mrs. Warren," Thomas's voice was gentle. "Are you all right?" "He knew," I said softly. "Michael knew what she was." "Yes. He discovered the truth several months ago. It broke his heart, but he was determined to protect you." Thomas slid a sealed envelope across the desk. "He asked me to give you this privately." With trembling fingers, I opened it to find a handwritten note in my son's familiar script. "Mom, if you're reading this, I'm gone, but I hope I've managed to right one terrible wrong. I made a mistake with Jessica, one that could have left you vulnerable. I'm sorry for the pain she's caused you, and for my blindness. Everything I have built came from the foundation of love and sacrifice you provided. It's yours now to secure your future, and perhaps do some good in this world. I love you always, Michael." The tears came then, unstoppable. Through them I looked at Thomas. "What happens now?" "Now," he said kindly, "we begin the process of transferring assets, and I suspect we prepare for Jessica to make good on her threat to contest, though she has virtually no chance of success given the evidence Michael compiled." I nodded, clutching Michael's letter. In the midst of crushing grief, my practical, thoughtful son had given me one final gift: security and protection from the woman who had seen me as nothing but an inconvenience to be discarded. Jessica made good on her threat, filing to contest the will within the week. What followed was 6 months of brutal legal battles that added a layer of stress to my already overwhelming grief. She hired an aggressive law firm known for handling high-profile divorces and estate disputes. Their strategy was clear from the outset: attack my character and portray me as a manipulative mother who had preyed on my dying son's vulnerability. Jessica gave interviews to gossip columns, painting herself as the devoted wife blindsided by her mother-in-law's machinations. "She never accepted me," Jessica told one particularly sympathetic reporter. "She turned Michael against me when he was too weak from cancer treatments to recognize what she was doing." The publicity was excruciating. Photographers appeared outside my Connecticut home. Old colleagues and neighbors called with awkward questions. The private process of grieving my son became a public spectacle as Jessica fought for what she considered her rightful inheritance. Thomas was steadfast, assuring me repeatedly that the case was solid. Michael was methodical, he explained during one of our many meetings. He gathered evidence for months, consulted with medical professionals to document his mental competence, and ensured everything was properly executed. Jessica is grasping at straws. Still, the process was draining both emotionally and financially. The legal fees mounted even with Thomas working partially on contingency out of respect for Michael. Each court appearance required me to relive aspects of my son's illness and death, to hear Jessica's attorneys twist our relationship into something unrecognizable. An unexpected source of strength emerged during this difficult time. Michael's former colleagues, many of whom I'd only met briefly at the funeral, began reaching out with messages of support. Several offered to testify about Michael's mental clarity in his final months, about conversations where he'd expressed concerns about Jessica's spending and behavior. Most surprising was the appearance of David Chen, Michael's closest friend from college, who had moved to Seattle years earlier. He flew in specifically to meet with my legal team. Jessica tried to cut Michael off from all his old friends, David explained over coffee after his deposition. She saw anyone with history as a threat because we could see through her act. The Michael I knew would never have wanted her to have control of his estate. He talked about setting up foundations, giving back to cancer research after what happened to Sarah. Jessica just wanted the money. Support also came from Sarah's parents, who had remained close to Michael after their daughter's death. They provided statements about the stark contrast between Sarah and Jessica, recounting instances where Jessica had made disparaging remarks about my son's first marriage. She once said it was pathetic that Michael kept a photo of Sarah on his desk at work. Sarah's mother told my lawyer, tears in her eyes, "What kind of person says that about someone who died of cancer, especially to her grieving parents?" As the case dragged on, Jessica became increasingly erratic. She refused to vacate the Hamptons house, despite the clear terms of the will forcing us to pursue a separate eviction proceeding. She made late-night phone calls to my home, alternating between threats and tearful pleas. When I changed my number, she began sending emails filled with vitriol. I found strength I didn't know I possessed. The woman who had always avoided confrontation, who had stepped aside when Jessica pushed, who had swallowed hurts rather than causing discord, was gone. In her place was someone who would honor her son's final wishes, no matter what. "You're becoming quite the formidable opponent," Thomas remarked after a particularly grueling deposition where I'd remained composed despite Jessica's attorney's aggressive questioning. "I'm not doing this for me," I replied. "I'm doing it for Michael. He wanted to make things right." After 6 months of legal maneuvering, depositions, and increasingly desperate tactics from Jessica's team, the judge issued his ruling. The will would stand in its entirety. Jessica's claims of undue influence were dismissed based on the substantial evidence of her own misconduct. She would receive exactly what Michael had stipulated: the apartment and the 5-year stipend, nothing more. Her final act of vengeance came when she was forced to vacate the Hamptons property. Before leaving, she destroyed many of Michael's personal possessions, his collection of first-edition books, family photos, mementos from his childhood. The property manager called me distressed at the destruction. "It looks like someone took a sledgehammer to some of the furniture," he reported, "and there's spray paint on several walls." The petty cruelty was painful, but not surprising. Jessica had shown her true nature long ago. What mattered was that Michael's larger legacy remained intact, protected by his foresight and the legal system's recognition of his clear intentions. When the legal battle finally concluded, I found myself in possession of substantial assets I had never expected or sought. The investment portfolio alone was worth millions. The beachfront property, even with the damage Jessica had inflicted, represented another significant sum. The life insurance payout was designed to support a lifestyle far beyond anything I had ever known. I sat in my modest Connecticut kitchen, surrounded by paperwork detailing my new financial reality, and wept not just for my son, but for the responsibility he had placed in my hands. What was I supposed to do with all this? How could material wealth possibly matter in a world without my child? The answer came gradually, as I sorted through Michael's remaining possessions. Among the items salvaged from Jessica's destruction was a journal he had kept during his illness. In it, I found not just his private thoughts and fears, but his hopes for the resources he had accumulated. "If there's any meaning to be found in this disease taking me as it took Sarah," he had written, "perhaps it's that I can direct some of my good fortune toward fighting it. Mom will know what to do." And suddenly, I did. 1 year after Michael's death, I stood in the atrium of the newly established Michael Warren Research Center at Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center. The foundation I had created with the majority of Michael's estate had funded a dedicated pancreatic cancer research initiative, bringing together brilliant minds from across the country to tackle the disease that had taken my son. I had moved from Connecticut into a comfortable but modest condo in Manhattan, close enough to be involved with the foundation's work, but far from the luxury penthouse where Michael had spent his final days. Jessica still lived there. From what I had heard, though, the monthly stipend barely covered the maintenance costs, and her lavish lifestyle had been significantly curtailed. The foundation wasn't my only focus. I had established a scholarship fund at Princeton in Michael's name specifically for students interested in pursuing finance, with an emphasis on ethical investing, the principles my son had valued. I also funded a wing at the Children's Hospital where Sarah had worked, ensuring her legacy continued as well. These projects gave me purpose, a way to channel grief into meaningful action, but they didn't erase the profound absence I felt every day. Nothing could replace the son I had lost, the future grandchildren who would never be the Sunday phone calls I still reached for before remembering. Grief, I had learned, doesn't follow a tidy timeline. It doesn't progress through stages in an orderly fashion and then conclude. It ambushes you in quiet moments, the sight of a young man in a business suit who walks like your son, a commercial for a movie. He would have enjoyed the automatic reach for the phone to share good news before remembering there's no one to call. Yet amid this ongoing grief, unexpected connections formed. Sarah's parents and I grew closer, united by our shared love for Michael and the daughter he had adored. Several of Michael's colleagues became friends, particularly James, who had worked closely with Michael and now served on the foundation's board. David from Seattle visited regularly, sharing stories of the college years I'd only heard fragments of before. 6 months after establishing the foundation, I received an unexpected package. It was from Thomas Michael's attorney, with a note explaining he had found it while organizing old files. Inside was a journal I had never seen before, one Michael had apparently asked Thomas to hold for safekeeping during his illness. This journal was different from the others, filled not with medical notes or estate planning, but with letters to me. Entries dated throughout his illness, each beginning, "Dear Mom," and containing thoughts, memories, and wisdom he wanted to share. Dear Mom. One entry read, "I've been thinking about what you taught me about resilience, how after Dad died you showed me that grief and strength can coexist. You never pretended the pain wasn't real, but you also never let it define you completely. I'm trying to follow that example now." Another, "Dear Mom, today was rough. The treatment left me sick for hours. During the worst of it, I remembered being 8 years old with that terrible flu. How you sat beside my bed all night reading stories, even after I fell asleep, just in case I woke up scared. I felt that same love today, even during the hardest moments." And the entry that broke my heart and healed it simultaneously. Dear Mom, if you're reading this after I'm gone, please know this truth. Jessica may have been my wife, but you were my constant. The love that shaped me, that taught me how to be the man I became, that was yours. The world has many kinds of love. The one between mother and child might be the strongest of all. It certainly has been for me. Please don't lose yourself in grief when I'm gone. Find new purpose, create new joy. Live vibrantly enough for both of us. That's how I'll know you're okay. This journal became my most precious possession, a continuing conversation with the son I had lost. I read it often, finding new insights, drawing strength from Michael's words. Life continued to evolve in ways I could never have predicted. The Foundation's first research grant led to a promising new treatment protocol. The scholarship fund selected its first recipients, bright young people with Michael's same drive and ethical foundation. I began speaking at cancer support groups, sharing my experience as both caregiver and grieving mother. Occasionally, I heard updates about Jessica. She had contested the end of her stipend when the 5 years concluded, but the courts again upheld Michael's wishes. The penthouse was sold to cover her mounting debts. She had married again briefly to a wealthy older man who apparently discovered her true nature even more quickly than Michael had. I felt no satisfaction in her downfall, only a distant sadness for the happiness she might have found, had greed and cruelty not consumed her. In time, I even found a measure of forgiveness, not for her sake, but for my own peace. On the second anniversary of Michael's death, I visited his grave alone, bringing the white roses he had always given me on Mother's Day. I sat beside the simple headstone he had requested, so different from the elaborate funeral Jessica had staged. "Your legacy continues," I told him, touching the cool marble. "Not just through the foundation or the scholarships, but through all the lives you touched." Sarah's parents send their love. David named his new baby Michael. James has revolutionized the ethical investment division at the firm. A gentle breeze rustled the nearby trees, and I felt that particular peacefulness that sometimes comes in cemeteries. "I'm keeping my promise," I continued, "finding purpose, creating joy, living vibrantly enough for both of us. I miss you every day, but I'm okay. You made sure of that." As I walked back to my car, I reflected on the journey of the past 2 years. The deepest grief I had ever known, yes, but also unexpected blessings, new friendships, meaningful work, a different kind of strength I hadn't known I possessed. Michael had protected me in death as I had protected him in life. His final act of love had been to ensure I could build something meaningful from the ashes of loss. Not just financial security, but a purpose that honored him, that transformed personal tragedy into broader healing. Have you faced unexpected betrayal from someone you trusted, or found yourself rebuilding after devastating loss? I'd love to hear your story in the comments below. Your experiences might help someone else navigating a similar path. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more real-life journeys through life's most challenging moments. And if you know someone who might draw strength from this experience, please share this video with them. Remember, even in our darkest moments, connection and compassion can light the way forward. Thank you for walking this path with me today.